All right, this meeting is now being recorded onto the cloud, it said. So thank you everybody for coming out to this meeting. This meeting is for a request for proposals for artists to deploy roadway murals and creative crosswalks in Chelsea, Massachusetts, along Winnesimmett Street and Division Street. The project is funded through a MassDOT Shared Streets and Spaces program. So we are happy to report that we did receive that funding. And so what we'll do today is we will walk through the contents of the RFP and presentation form just to give everybody a contextualization of the project area, what we're looking for. And once we move through some of the aspects, both logistical and artistic and sort of community input related to the project, we will open the floor up for questions. We will need to be sensitive in our responses to these questions. Most questions will likely need to be directed to Dragika Ivanis, which is the City of Chelsea's Chief Procurement Officer, in order for us not to give any sort of favorability to any of the respondents of this RFP. So we hope that you will allow us to be somewhat diplomatic in our responses. And if you have something very specific or that's more appropriate for Dragika Ivanis, we will politely ask you to forward those questions to her. And those will need to be into her by tomorrow at the latest. So please bring out whatever questions you might have and we will appropriately direct you. What we'll do now is we will have Mimi run through a presentation of the project, and I'll just introduce myself really quickly and then I'll hand it over to Mimi. My name is Ben Kears. I'm the Senior Planner for the Department of Housing and Community Development of the City of Chelsea, stewarding the application process and implementation with Mimi Graney. Mimi, take it away and I will make you the host.
Excellent. Yes, I'm Mimi Graney. I'm the Civic Design and Engagement Strategist, and I'm going to be walking you through our presentation. And I can't multitask here. So our RFP is to focus on two specific areas. So it's Division Street through downtown Chelsea, from Hawthorne Street to Park Street, and then this section of Winnesimmett Street between Broadway and Park. So this is a project that's furthering the city's downtown initiative called Chelsea Prospers, and there's a number of different elements connected with that. This is showing the district of the downtown. That's basically Bellingham Square to Chelsea Square. That's from William Street to basically the public library. And part of our goals is really to look at how to not only just provide an improvement to the physical space in the downtown, but looking at building public life and civic pride. It's really looking at a holistic approach. As part of our initiatives around public art in particular, we're looking at both creating, improving physical space, but also providing opportunities for creative expression and self-reflection in our community. So not only are we looking for a great output, but we're looking at public art that engages the community, reflects the community, and is something that is contributing to our local identity. So again, to review what the locations are, our downtown is kind of anchored on two ends. On the sort of northeast is Bellingham Square. City Hall is here. Washington Street becomes Hawthorne Street here, and then Broadway cuts through. So we have focused on these two areas. One, Division Street, which we are advancing as a neighborway, which is a shared street. And then Winnesimmett is kind of part of Chelsea Square, and we're looking at advancing to make more public space in that area through a roadway treatment. So we're in the midst of doing some new zoning in the area or permitting to help facilitate the use of public space. So in Luther Place and in Chelsea Square, we're looking at creating festival zones. So over the last couple of years, we have been doing a number of public events, but we're looking at making it easier for the public to do that as well. And then these green lines are representing areas where we're looking to foster shared streets. So areas where it's easier to do a block party, to do street performers, to shut down the street for outdoor dining. So these are just proposed areas at the moment, but it's sort of representing about how we're sort of looking to reimagine public space in Chelsea as an area, a city that has very limited open space. We're looking at how to be able to use the roadways that normally are dominated by cars to reclaim them for people. So as I mentioned, this area, Luther Place, is a parking lot that's on Cherry Street. So Cherry Street is an alley parallel to Broadway, just as Division Street's an alleyway to Broadway. So here on Luther Place, we've been doing a number of different events. Last year, we did a large mural. We had been doing our night market. We're looking forward to the post-pandemic life when we're able to come together in large format projects like that. In Chelsea Square, there's a number of different initiatives. Similar to Luther Place, we've been doing a number of different events there. So for example, one of our festivals was Fiesta Verano, which was an event to celebrate Latin American culture. And during these events, we would shut down 2 sections of Chelsea Square. So we'd shut down this section of 2nd Street and then this section of Winnisomet Street. And we're looking as part of a redevelopment project for the downtown overall is how to be able to actually do some physical changes to these 2 streets that would better enable use of the spaces. So you can see, again, a city that has very limited green space and open space, that the roadways are kind of breaking up this area. So, and even within it, there's a number of different curbs and fences and trees and benches that make it really beautiful for passive recreation, but for when you want to do larger group programming, it makes it very challenging. So this coming summer, we're planning on redoing this section of 2nd Street to make the street level with the curbs. So it'll now allow pedestrians to move back and forth, make it much more handicapped accessible, kind of helps us reclaim the sidewalks and the roadway. And then especially when we do events, that kind of makes it more usable. And then as part of this project, we're looking for a roadway treatment on this section of Winnisomet Street. So this one won't be getting any permanent or kind of more structural changes to it, but we're hoping through this roadway treatment to be able to advance the use of that. Especially under the pandemic, we're looking at, there's a number of different restaurants on this side of Chelsea Square that have very limited access to outdoor dining. So we're kind of hoping to create something that sort of like the equivalent of a food court of sorts, so that people can get takeout from these restaurants and come and have a bigger shared space here. And this is another view of that same street, from a different angle. So this is, again, looking at from another space, and you can see the Chelsea Theatre Works is right here in Chelsea Square, and it's separated from all the restaurants on this side. So in some ways, that this roadway, extra barriers to traverse makes it harder to actually create some synergy among them. And the Apollinaire Theater, that's the home company of Chelsea Theatre Works, has got a really dynamic facade at night. But again, we've got this sort of dark area in between. So by reclaiming this for as a closed street that can still be opened on occasion for parking as needed, the roadway treatment will kind of help to advance our idea of like this is a special kind of space. And the Apollinaire has already been doing, for example, outdoor theater, both in Chelsea Square and at the Port Park. And we're hoping that by shutting this down, that we can actually extend the theater that's inside here out onto the rest of Chelsea Square. There's a couple images to kind of give you a sense about what the neighborhood looks like. So here's that roadway right in front of the theater, and you can see it's actually shady and really wonderful in the summertime. And as again a city that's dealing with a lot of heat, being able to help welcome people into this green space would be wonderful. On the bottom left corner is some of the ways that we've used it in the past, for example, with programs with the library. This is one of the restaurants across the way that has outdoor dining, but you can see they have very limited seating by just using the sidewalk. So we're looking to reclaim that. So we're hoping that the treatment will look at this entire area. It doesn't have to be covered 100% curb to curb, but we are looking at something that really looks at this being a different spot and to have have vehicles feel less welcoming coming into this area to really make it feel more amenable to pedestrians. Under the grant that we received that's facilitating this RFP, we're looking at obtaining some mobile barriers that could be here, but we're not expecting that the person or the team that's selected under this RFP will be responsible for those, but just to have that in mind. So then the other part of this project is looking at treatments along Division Street. And we have been, over the last couple of years, really looking at improving the street. So this is from 2 years ago, when the city undertook a reconstruction of the roadway. So the curbs were rebuilt, the sidewalks were rebuilt, the roadway was resurfaced. And as part of that, the sidewalks still stayed very narrow. So it has, for all intents and purposes, remained a shared street with people often walking down the middle of the road. One of the concerns we had with repaving it was around traffic calming, and also looking at how can we have people who are by bike and walking to really feel like they own the street when they're going through, and it be a place that could be a good alternative for folks coming through the downtown. So one thing to note, part of why we're really looking at advancing this roadway is, one, to make it safer. It had been a place where kind of not the most pleasant activities were happening. So repaving it, cleaning it up, improved it a lot. But these intersections in the downtown on Broadway are have the highest clusters of pedestrian accidents. So the city is planning on doing signalized intersections here, but those are still a couple years away. So in the meantime, we're looking at what interventions can we do on Division Street to help people be able to walk along Division Street as a safe way for kids on bikes, moms going strollers, folks that maybe have limited mobility, to really feel like this is a place where the traffic is slower, that they can feel at home here. So as I mentioned, in the first year, when we redid the pavement, we did a number of different public art projects. So those are showing on this map all in the green dots. Those were all art executed within that era. Then last summer, we did a number of wheat paste murals, mostly along along Cherry Street, and then painted murals, mostly along Division Street. So we're really looking at Division Street becoming very much an art way, and year by year being able to layer this in. So this is the year where we're really going big and taking over the roadway. So this is from the first year, and our priority that year was a number of larger murals that were done by kind of well-established public artists. And then we did some kind of color by number, you might say, where the community was painting in based on the artist designs. And then some of our local artists were doing some smaller murals for the first time. Then this last year, working with a couple of public artists who were training our local team, we had some of these new artists doing larger murals, both in wheat paste and then also in paint. Again, those were mostly along Division Street, but we scattered them through the neighborhood. And these are all new murals that were done on Division Street this last year. So again, reviewing the study area, we're looking for Division Street for the art to extend from Hawthorne Street. So if folks are familiar with the neighborhood, basically from down by Stop and Compare and behind Tukasa, all the way down to behind the Apollinaire Theater. So the Apollinaire Theater on this side faces onto Winnissimmet Street, where we're looking for treatment. And then the back of it is on Division Street. You were not able to see Winnissimmet Street to Division Street, so there's not a clear sight line. Even with that, we would still like the pavement treatments to be relate to each other in one way, because they are so incredibly close. These stars indicate where we would like the creative crosswalk treatments to be placed. And this gives you a sense of what those roadways look like. So this is Division Street going across, and these are some of the cross streets. So you see that they're rather wide. Often there's, in some cases, there's parking on both sides of the street. Again, here's another one, and you can see that people are often using these crosswalks. There's not really the best curb cuts here. And again, because people are actually walking on the roadway and the sidewalks on each side are rather narrow, we're wanting a crosswalk that will basically be the same width as the roadway. So in some ways, it won't necessarily look like your traditional crosswalk with the two white lines. We're really looking at something that makes Division Street feel like a contiguous street as it goes through. So some of the values and goals that we're looking at approaching this, and we're hoping that the selected candidate will be able to bring these, understanding that we're looking for a balance of safety and flexible functionality. So by that meaning, to make it the roadway is perfectly safe, we would be setting up Jersey barriers and having it be incredibly physically robust, but that really limits our ability to be able to open it again just to the street and to be able to use it for lots of different uses. Division Street, that is the front door for residences. That's the loading zone for nearby businesses. We really need to have it. It's still a working area. But at the same time, we're really trying to shift and rebalance that use so that pedestrians and bicyclists feel like they have an equal use of that space. We're recognizing that downtown Chelsea is a place where a lot of commuters are going through. People are going to work, going home, doing their shopping, lots of folks coming and going, but we're trying to create a space where people also feel like they can stop and rest. So that section of Chelsea Square, we're wanting it to not just be a pass through or place to park, but a place to actually have programming, a place to stop and engage with your neighbors. And we're recognizing that the downtown is ever changing. So Chelsea Square in particular is a historic district with really amazing architecture from back into the 1800s, but we're a community that's filled with recent immigrants and newcomers who are approaching this and have got a fresh perspective. So we're looking for somebody that can balance those tensions. Our neighborhood cares very much about people. Our great value about Chelsea is really inviting the other, especially the most vulnerable people among us. And at the same time, we're looking for something that recognizes that these are places of business, that we're looking for something with a high level of design quality. And we're wanting to engage the diversity of people in our community, both as people to enjoy the art, but also to be part of the co-creators of it. We want it to reflect the identity of our community. So we're looking forward to working with designers that bring a level of professionalism, but at the same time, we want them to be in very close dialogue with our residents, recognizing that the process is as important as the product. So the deliverables of this, as I've gone over, is that section of Winnisemmett Street and Chelsea Square to help create and expand the sense of public usable open space in Chelsea Square. Then, and that's to actually create the design and execute the roadway mural in that area. On Division Street is to design and execute a surface treatment from Hawthorne Street to Park Street. And then for the creative crosswalks, there will be a separate contractor to execute the thermoplastic, and I'll go into that in a second. So for this RFP, you'd only be required to design those crosswalks. You wouldn't actually have to obtain the materials and install those. And then kind of baked into what those deliverables are is that level of community engagement, researching the community, understanding the space, connecting with residents as much as possible, actively engaging them in helping you to execute the design. Documenting your work, so we'll hope that you'll take lots of pictures, save your designs, really include us in your art making process, and provide that documentation so that we can show the finished product to the world. And then a kind of more modest one is if you have recommendations of like the particular materials that you're using, if you can make sure you share with us the particular colors so that if it does need to be touched up over the coming years, that we'll be able to do that. So I'm sharing a bunch of images purely for inspiration. These are not at all prescriptive. It's just to give you a sense of some of the different treatments that we've been looking at. So we've been inspired by some of the massive roadway murals that have been happening in other places of the country and the world. And you can see, you know, some of these are really big expanses of color, curb to curb. We are really open to boldness in this project, especially Division Street is really our street that we're kind of seeing as a place to play and to really transform that street in a big way. We're really looking at how does it engage people on the street. So like this butterfly one, it looks great from a satellite. I would, as part of our review process, we're really looking at how does it look for people on the street as they go along, the ones that are super dynamic. I'm sharing these to just let you know we don't necessarily need it to be a full field of color, and we recognize with this budget that there's going to be limited ability. So you can think a little bit about how to create air within it, within the design. It doesn't have to be completely covered with paint. So as I mentioned, thermoplastic is the material that we're asking for use on the creative crosswalks. We're requiring this because it's a much more robust material, and we're caring and try and prioritize safety for there. And that's where there's higher levels of vehicle traffic. So thermoplastic is basically kind of like a plastic material. I've only seen this, I'm no professional, but it does require licensed professionals. It requires a different skill set. So the city will be separately contracting with a team to do that. And they've got a budget of $90,000. But the candidate or team that's selected through this RFP will decide what that design looks like. And they can allocate how those materials are used. So for example, so there is kind of a limited palette with that, but depending on how you use it, you could do a more open design that could incorporate paint within it. So if you want to do something more complex. So to give you an example of, these are some thermoplastic crosswalks that were created. Some, like for example, this one, it's incredibly detailed. So those will be a more expensive budget to be able to execute through the thermoplastic contractor to do a super designed one like this. That's very, more, one with more colors, more pieces. It's put together a little bit like jigsaw pieces. But you could potentially do a more simple design that similarly, highlights the street, but that the cost savings that you obtain by doing a simpler design could enable you to use the thermoplastic anywhere else in the study area. So if you wanted to do a simple design like this and then use that motif scattered anywhere else on Division Street or in Chelsea Square, you'd be able to do that. And the design team would be kind of able to play with that budget. You can't make the thermoplastic budget part of your own budget. So you can't turn thermoplastic into paint or into your design fee, but you can move the thermoplastic around, and we'll kind of allow the team to determine that. So some of the key dates to have in mind: April 15th is the deadline. That is hard and fast. We can't give any wiggle room to how much we might love you. Our plan is to select a team of finalists, and that we will be doing virtual interviews with them. There'll be a local team that will be conducting those interviews. And then we're planning a very fast turnaround to execute the contract. We're a little bit beholden to the requirements of the funding that we've obtained. So we're looking for who's ever selected to jump into action very quickly, and to immediately be able to execute their ideas for what those designs would look like, to start moving forward with those, to basically start finalizing them in May and June, and then basically start executing them. According to our grant, we're supposed to have this all completed by the end of June. We recognize that this is a very crazy timeline, but we're looking for a team that can work with us as much as possible to meet this deadline. So the budget that is included within the RFP is $70,000, and the deadline, again, for questions is on the 7th. And you need to email these. We'll take questions as part of this meeting, but if you have more detailed ones, if you can send it to the head of purchasing, and then all the questions will be compiled and shared with all of the respondents, and the deadline to submit your proposals. So for folks that maybe are new to this process, I highly recommend that you look at the RFP in great detail and make sure you respond to each of the questions, because there's basically a very clear matrix of how you're scored. And we can get more into the kind of conceptual things more on the interview, but make sure that you respond to the proposal basically kind of according to the letter of the law. So I will now take any questions that folks have. I'm going to keep it on screen share for a little bit, just so that we can kind of roll through and see if there's particular questions. It might be easier if folks have questions, if you want to just put your hand up and we can call upon you.
Hi, I have a question.
Hello, Amanda.
Hi everybody. So when you were talking about Division Street, I want to make sure that I have this down correctly. So Division Street can be a you can have thermoplastic on it should you want to potentially, you know, put those in. As you said, you can't turn thermoplastic into paint. But so is the surface treatment, when you say that, is that textured, or can it be paint, or can it be anything?
So the thermoplastic, we want it concentrated at the crosswalks. So
Yep.
at those spaces. If you created designs in thermoplastic, you wanted to put anywhere on that section of Winnisquam Street or anywhere along Division Street, you can kind of spread it out in other ways. It looks kind of a little bit like the traditional like white lines that you'd see on a crosswalk. It's slightly raised.
Okay.
It's basically melted into it. It's, if your folks are familiar, you might see like on, there's two different ways of looking at thermoplastic. Some of it's actually stamped. They create a stamp and then they embed it. With that kind. Is the budget would allow us for just the type that would be kind of melted on the top. The treatment we're expecting with the budget that we've got, that you could execute could be any other kind of paint. We were expecting folks would probably do either oil or latex based, exterior paint, but you could do spray paint. We're wanting it to be a little bit robust with a lot of traffic on it because Division Street does get a fair amount of vehicle traffic. So probably the kind of traditional paint would be easier rather than spray paint. And also that's probably a medium that's easier to engage the community as kind of co-creators in it. But we're open to hear what other materials might be recommended.
Awesome. And then my only other question is, with the crosswalks for that go across Division, are you wanting those to be, are they going to be in a specific sort of like prescribed rectangle? Or are you open to something that's potentially a little bit more flowy? Because I know that you've talked a little bit about the negative space.
So for the crosswalks, we are wanting them to really read a little bit as a crosswalk so that there is a fair amount of cross traffic. So we're wanting people to feel safe using them. So we're wanting the cars going by to actually see that there's something different here, slow down, pay attention. So we're not necessarily looking for a traditional two white lines because we're recognizing that the actual dimensions of those spaces don't qualify for what an official crosswalk would look like. But we are looking for something that's more beefed up. So some of the examples that I had that look very flowery, like this wouldn't necessarily read well as a crosswalk. We are looking for something that looks a little bit more like that. It doesn't need to be as heavy as these, but something that looks a little more robust so that folks can, that'll stand up to the wear and tear and will meet our goal for roadway safety there. And we are wanting ideally it, because again, the parameters are a little off. And because it is kind of a shared street, for it to not be from the sidewalk to sidewalk, because people aren't actually using the sidewalks here. We're wanting it to kind of go on the roadway itself. So one thing to know in terms of the RFP, because we recognize that this is a very short turnaround. We're not necessarily expecting as part of this process for the teams to give us their final designs. We're kind of looking for preliminary treatments, approaches, your experience, and recognizing that there's going to be a little bit of an iterative process once you actually meet with the materials contractor, once you get out of the fields, that there's going to be an opportunity to adjust along the way.
Hi, Mimi and Ben, this is Mark, Mark Chase. Just curious if thermoplastic is definitely the only thing you're considering, or if you're considering potentially Ruby Lake, which is that glass aggregate, which a lot of people use instead of thermoplastic. It's more glass-like. It's kind of like colored sand, and it has the same longevity. I'm actually not sure how the cost compares, but I've heard that it's somewhat similar. So,
You want to take that one, Ben?
Sure. Mark, so there are multiple vendors out in the world that do thermoplastic and similar. I would argue that Ruby Lake is a similar and sometimes interchangeable like thermoplastic deployment. So I think it's a good specific question. Do I think it necessarily functions into like the design of the creative crosswalk? Not necessarily, but I do think that, you know, the material that we end up using and the vendor that we end up using, there will need to be some type of dialogue back and forth with what's able to be deployed with thermoplastic or Ruby Lake or equivalent. So something durable and like that is what we are aiming for, but we're using thermoplastic as sort of the umbrella term, as in a very robust roadway material that is appropriate for a crosswalk. So if that answers the question. Cool, thumbs up, great.
Any other questions? I do recommend folks to consider working in teams, especially if you have expertise in one area and feel like you might not be able to meet all the criteria. You probably all concede the other people who are part of this discussion. You can also reach out to other folks that have complementary expertise to make a stronger proposal.
Hi, yes, I do have one question. Community engagement, have you given thought about, are there set meetings, the number of meetings you'd want for community engagement, or anything around community engagement that you guys are looking to obtain, or are you just looking, is it open right now?
It's open. We recognize we're in a pandemic and giving the teams a ridiculously fast turnaround.
Yeah.
So we're really open to what that might be. We're planning on having some of the neighborhood stakeholders to be on the team that, or the committee that will be reviewing the applicants. So hoping that that will help us kind of kickstart the engagement. There's lots of ways of being able to connect with the community, but we recognize that's going to be a challenge, and that's the one that we're, even in terms of our approach so far, has been our weakest. So we're not being particularly prescriptive. We are looking for the team to maybe the applicants to have some creative ways on how they might be able to do that. But we're open to what your ideas might be.
Mimi, if it's okay with you, there's 2 questions that popped up in the chat, which I feel comfortable addressing.
Please do.
So will the city provide traffic control and or police details during installation? Yes, we will provide that for you. We will call on a police detail. That's at no cost to you. The second that I'm sure everybody gets when we're talking about crosswalk deployment and creative crosswalks is any concerns with not meeting federal design guidelines for roadway and crosswalk markings. So if it was a federal highway, I would be concerned. It is a local roadway, and so therefore that does not apply. Don't worry about it. It does not come into action on this particular roadway, but I do appreciate that sentiment. And you know, as a suggestive point is that, you know, in designing these creative crosswalks, you know, take some of those precedent images that Mimi shared and just acknowledge that they serve not just an artistic function, but also a traffic function. So they need to be clearly sort of a part of this roadway that is signaling to them that it is indeed still a crosswalk, even if it is creative. So we can sort of skirt around that perceived traffic and safety issue. So, yeah.
Okay, well, if folks have any additional questions, I invite you to send them via email to our colleague at the purchasing department. We will be making this video, I believe, available publicly for folks who are responding to this. So if there's other questions, and then any other written questions will be available there. Unfortunately, that's our official way of doing things, and we're not going to be able to kind of stay in dialogue. So I am greatly looking forward to seeing some of the ideas that folks put forward, and we're I've been sharing this on Facebook that we got this grant, and folks are, a lot of other communities are looking at kind of doing bold things like this and thinking like, oh, Chelsea's being pretty bold. So I hope you'll respond to this RFP and help us being bold and colorful and really changing our downtown in a positive way.
Awesome. I'm going to reclaim host and I'm going to stop recording the meeting. And thank you all for attending. We're absolutely looking forward to this. So take care and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
Everybody.